have a friend who's unconscious. She hasn't moved. He's cold extremities. Probably need an ambulance.
Okay, how old is he?
He is 19. Yeah, 19 years old.
What's he breathing?
He is breathing.
Was there any alcohol or anything involved, do you know?
Yes, there is.
All right, we'll get somebody over there, okay? If anything, just call back and let us know.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
On the evening of February 2nd, 2017, the brand new beta pledges were called in for bid acceptance night. It would be Tim's first night spent in the fraternity house. That night, there were a series of initiation rituals that the new pledges were supposed to complete. One of these included the gauntlet. This is an obstacle course that pledges had to run through and drink lots of vodka, beer, and bagged wine.
Much of the night was captured on CCTV, and we can piece the timeline together from court documents. Tim begins the gauntlet at 9:21 p.m. and the pledge master hands him a bottle of vodka and Tim drinks from it heavily. Then Tim is handed a beer by brother Nicholas Kubera and he shotguns it. About an hour later, the pledges begin to walk up from the basement and they all look visibly intoxicated. In the span of 82 minutes, Tim has consumed at least 18 alcoholic drinks. At the conclusion of that binge, his blood alcohol concentration was somewhere between 0.28 and 0.36. At 10:40, a brother named Lars Kenyon helped Tim to a couch in the Great Hall. Tim was staggering and hunched over as he walked, and 3 minutes later, Nicholas Kubera came over and encouraged him to stand up. Nicholas helped Tim walk through the dining room and kitchen before returning to the living room. At 10:45, Tim stands up without help and staggers to the front door. He tries and fails to open it. Then he staggers towards the basement staircase, passing brothers Jerry Coyne and Luke Visser on the way. Then Tim, in his heavily intoxicated state, falls down the stairs. A brother hears the fall and looks down the stairs and sees Tim. Brothers Ryan Burke, Luke Visser, Greg Rizzo, and Jonah Newman carry Tim up from the stairs at 10:47 p.m. He is limp and there's a visible bruise on his abdomen. The boys put Tim on the couch.
And little does anyone know at the time, the bruise on Tim's abdomen is actually from a spleen laceration that he has just sustained. Blood is spilling into his body at this point. Greg gives Tim a sternum rub, which is seen on campus as a test for consciousness, but he doesn't respond. 2 minutes later, Greg throws a beer in Tim's face, but he still doesn't respond. Another brother then throws shoes at him hard. At 10:55, Jonah grabs a backpack and puts it on Tim to stop him from rolling on his back. At 11 p.m., brother Ryan Foster sits on Tim's leg so that he doesn't roll over. 12 minutes later, Jonah sits on Tim's leg to stop them from moving. At 11:14, Cordell Davis walks into the Great Hall and sees Tim lying on the couch. He leans over Tim to get a look at him and notices that he's in rough shape. He turns to the brothers and looks really animated. He points to his head and then points at Tim. Cordell testified that he was screaming and yelling at the brothers, telling them that they needed to get help and that Tim needed to go to the hospital. Jonah then shoves Cordell up against the wall and tells him things are under control. Here's Cordell talking about what happened that night.
If he had too much to drink and he was on the couch, this is kind of a bad situation. They're kind of brushing it off, saying, no, like, he'll be fine. He needs to sleep it off. They're like, Tim fell down the stairs too.
No one thought to call 911. You didn't think to remove yourself from the situation and get your friend help?
I did. I said, he needs to be at the hospital right now. We should call 911, get him in an ambulance. And I'm screaming. I'm being very obvious with my thoughts. And, you know, I was kind of like, shut up. I got thrown against the wall. And I didn't know what to do after that. I felt kind of useless. I felt like I had no say in the situation after that.
You didn't feel like you could leave and call somewhere else, go outside or do anything?
I was told that I was overreacting, that I was crazy. I said, well, if he fell down the stairs, maybe he has a concussion, maybe worse. And we can't let him fall asleep. And they're saying, oh, that's a myth. So I'm questioning myself. I'm saying, do I really know what I'm talking about? What do I actually know?
That's an example of the bystander effect.
Yeah.
At 11:25, Pledge Master Daniel Casey walks into the Great Hall to check on Tim. He slaps Tim's face 3 times. Meanwhile, 2 brothers are wrestling in the Great Room, and they fall down hard on top of Tim. After this, Tim starts twitching and vomiting. At 11:53, Greg Rizzo sent a message to the Frats GroupMe chat. Also, Tim Piazza might actually be a problem. He fell 15 feet down a flight of stairs hair first, going to need help. So then about an hour passes and it's February 3rd and Tim is still on the couch, dying. Throughout the night, Tim is in and out of consciousness, still highly intoxicated and thrashing around in pain.
At 1 a.m., the brothers watch as Tim vomits and begins to twitch on the couch. At 1:48 a.m., Tim rolls on the floor. Ryan Joseph and brother Matt Reinmond pick Tim up and slam him on the couch. Brother Joseph Ems appears frustrated with Tim on camera footage, so he takes a shoe and throws it at Tim, but he doesn't wake up. Then, using an open hand, Joseph hits Tim hard right on his bruise. Tim's spleen had been lacerated, but after this hit, it was shattered. Tim does not wake up. The brothers leave him lying there unconscious on the couch. At 3:22 a.m., Tim regains at least a little bit of consciousness. Joseph is nearby. Tim tries to stand, but he can't get his footing. He falls backward and hits his head on the hardwood floor. Joseph shakes Tim to see if he moves, and then just leaves the room.
About 30 minutes later, Tim tries to stand up again, but he falls face first on the floor. And he lies there until 4:59 a.m. And at this time, Tim is able to stand and he starts to stagger towards the lobby. But a few seconds later, he falls into an iron railing and onto the stone floor. Tim got up again and tried to make it to the front door, but again, he falls, this time head first into the door. At 5:08, Tim rests on his knees, his head is buried in his hands, and then Tim rolls onto his side and holds his abdomen. At 5:15 a.m., brother Jonathan Martinez comes downstairs for a drink of water and he actually stepped over Tim. 10 minutes later, another brother, Frederick Steimling, came down for water and he watched Tim for a moment, then tried helping him get to the Great Hall. Tim falls down 3 steps and Frederick steps over Tim and leaves him lying on the floor. Eventually, Tim made it into the Great Hall. At 6:44, another pledge walked into the Great Hall and found Tim. He watched as Tim rolled off of the couch and fell to the floor. Tim is able to get to his knees and he cradles his head in his hands. At 6:57, the pledge took out his phone and recorded a Snapchat video of Tim. And then while Tim rocked back and forth on the ground, the pledge left. At 7:18 a.m., for a few hours, he actually staggers around the basement, ending up behind one of the bars. Brothers Daniel Erickson and Kyle Pecci went to search for Tim around 10 a.m., and Daniel found him still behind the basement bar. He was lying on his back with his arms at his sides, and his hands were clenched into fists. His face is bloody, his skin is pale and cold to the touch. His eyes are half open, and his breathing is labored. Daniel, Kyle, and another brother carry Tim up the stairs to the Great Hall and put him on the couch. His body is rigid, and his skin is gray. The brothers tried to shake him awake. Tim remained unconscious. They tried to unclench his fists, but they were too rigid. Then they wiped the blood from his face. He was missing the shirt and jacket he wore the night before, and brothers tried to dress him, but his arms were too stiff to put a shirt on. They covered him in a blanket to try and warm him up, but nobody called 911. The brothers then began to clean up the house. One brother uses his phone to search for things like cold extremities and drunk person, and binge drinking, alcohol, bruising, or discoloration. Other brothers stand around on their phones, and yet nobody calls for help until nearly an hour after Tim was found in the basement. Finally, at 10:48 a.m., brother Ryan McCann called 911, and he doesn't mention that Tim had fallen down the stairs that night.
Tim was immediately rushed to Mount Nittany Medical Center. 80% of Tim's blood had leaked into his abdomen by the time he arrived at the hospital. That morning, Tim hadn't come home, so his roommate called Tim's brother Mike. He was worried because Tim always came home. So Mike decided to call the hospital and ask if he was there. They told him that he was, and Mike needed to come right away, which he did. Once Mike got to the emergency room, he saw Tim, who was covered in bruises and on life support. Evelyn, Tim's mom, was at work when she got the call from Mike. He told her that Tim was being airlifted to Hershey Medical Center and that they needed to come now.
The doctor told Evelyn that Tim was a very sick boy who had a subdural hematoma. After that, he was taken via helicopter to Hershey Medical Center, where he arrived at 3 p.m. Evelyn called her husband and they immediately raced to the hospital. But a chaplain was sent to Jim and Evelyn immediately after they got to the hospital, and again, Jim knew. The chaplain led them to a surgeon who delivered the horrible news. Tim wasn't going to wake up.
So Tim was surrounded by his family and they held his hands and told him that they loved him, and a tear rolled down Tim's cheek. So clearly he knew he was there. Jim, his father, actually asked the doctor if Tim could hear him, and the doctor said maybe. Jim took comfort in the fact that Tim could have known that he was with family and that he was loved, but he thinks that if Tim could hear, he also could hear what doctors were saying and that he knew he was about to die. Doctors did everything they could, but they determined that Tim's injuries were unsurvivable, and at 1:23 a.m., Timothy John Piazza was pronounced dead. His cause of death was multiple traumatic injuries sustained by multiple falls. He suffered a skull fracture, ruptured spleen, traumatic brain injury, collapsed lung, and a subdural hematoma. The manner of death was listed as accidental. Jim, Tim's father, asked the surgeon if Tim could have been saved had someone gotten him help earlier. The surgeon said absolutely yes. If after Tim had fallen down those stairs the first time, after the boys tested 3 times and found Tim was unconscious and they had called for help, he would still be alive. But they didn't, and now he isn't.